Soccer Today is powered by Spin Media. From podcast to video production, visit spinmediadigitalsolutions.com and bring your content to the next level.
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, golazo, golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramie, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night. Welcome to Soccer Today for Thursday, July 14th, 2022. Happy Bastille Day, and we'll wish a Bastille Day to all our French listeners. First of all, we'll invite you to subscribe to our YouTube page. Click on that YouTube red button and that notification bell to be made aware of whenever we upload a brand new podcast. And celebrating Bastille Day today is Duane Rollins, live from les Champs-Élysées. Duane, how are you today?
Enchanté, ça va bien? How am I doing? I don't know. Is that okay? Yeah.
Sure. Duane is wearing his French jersey.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
We're celebrating Bastille Day as we're going to talk about TFC, and I guess we're going to talk about Mavinga. So it is French in a way.
Yeah, no, it is French. I was watching myself on the screen. Sorry, I'm vain, very vain. Yeah, we're going to talk about Chris Mavinga. He's very French, yes.
Yes, so of course we're going to break down TFC's loss at the hands of Chicago at Soldier Field. We're also going to talk about Vancouver drawing Cincinnati at TQL Stadium. Almost a full slate of games in Major League Soccer midweek, and it is the midweek review, and Mark-Anthony Kaye made his debut for Toronto. We'll break down how he was lined up, the debut of the 4-3-3 of Bob Bradley with TFC, but let's have a look overall at the games from last night. It started with a Texas Derby last night. We had Austin at home versus Houston, and Austin decided to take the first, well, that one happened on Tuesday, by the way, but Austin decided to take the first rank overall in MLS. With the win, Austin has 40 points and tops the Supporter Shield standings. Of course, that was everybody's prediction, right, Duane, that Austin would be first. We'll talk about this later on and when we look at the standings, but Austin, big win. Last night, Atlanta at home versus Salt Lake. Big win for Atlanta United. Finally a win to take themselves off the bottom and back into maybe what could be a successful few games for them. Cincinnati, Vancouver. Vancouver came from behind in this one. A different lineup, the 4-3-2-1. Cavallini up top. A few changes for Vancouver. We'll break that down later, same as Toronto and Chicago. But Minnesota, Kansas City 1-1. Kansas City can't buy a victory for the life of them, and Kansas City continues to struggle every time.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness to them, I guess they did that. It was a come from behind victory. Minnesota did have the lead in about the 75th minute, and Kansas City tied it up. But they were damn lucky at the death. If you watch that game, and I was one of the games, one of my screens had that on. There was a scramble in the sixth, right in the final kick of the game, and I still don't know how the ball didn't go in. So it was a bit of a lucky play by KC. But when you're struggling as much as they are, you take what you can get. It's interesting. There's been a lot of talk of KC. We were early to the game of the Peter Vermees conversation about a month ago, or 2 months ago. We were talking about it even. Some of the national media is starting to bring it up. Now, the general consensus is that he's untouchable, which is kind of what we said too. But
move him up. That's what's going to happen. Move one level up in the hierarchy. Drop the coach, stay sporting director. He's like director of personnel, if I'm not mistaken. He's basically the acting sporting director. Just take that role. Take the president role. Heck, you can do whatever you want, maybe even partner and own part of the club, but give the managing job to maybe a newer generational coach.
Yeah, and look, there's conversations we had that across the league. There's very few people that have the dual roles anymore. And it used to be common. Like back when I started watching MLS, the Bruce Arenas, the Sugar Smiths, they had all the roles, right? They maybe had an assistant they leaned on heavily, but they generally were the man. They were the face, like a college football coach, football through the air. It's changing. Peter Vermees is one of the few that remains in those roles. And when you look at what he's been doing there over the past few years, there's a lot of great stuff. He's developed a lot of coaches that have moved on to other organizations and are doing okay there too. So maybe it's time for him to do that exactly. And, here in Toronto, we can have the same conversation about Bob Bradley. Maybe not yet, because it's not fair to judge him yet based on what he was given. But that might be a conversation we're having. Like, we might need other views in there. It might not be good to have one singular view. Not many organizations anywhere in the world now are completely top down, and that's kind of what that speaks to, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it'll be interesting to see if Kansas City can even get things back into I wouldn't say into a decent season, but they're dead last in the entire league right now. We'll continue our look at some of the games from last night. DC Columbus. It's not a loss, at least for DC United. Of course, earlier this week, it was officialized that Wayne Rooney is the new manager in the nation's capital of the United States. Columbus 2 and DC United 2. I want to say a big thank you to Lucas Elarayan for having a decent day out there and helping my fantasy. I've been really doing a lot of progress in my fantasy over the last few weeks, and I'm proud of myself. I know not a lot of people care about MLS fantasy, and it's not something I want to spend a whole lot of time on, but it is fun when you're changing your strategy and you're actually 8 weeks undefeated. All right, Miami-Philly, big win for Philly, and should we say they took the chance to officialize the permanent transfer of Julian Carranza, who was on loan from Miami to Philly. He's now fully a Philly player, helping his team get a 2-1 win against the Flamingos.
Yeah, and look, that was I watched that game too, and it was a pretty dominant performance by Philadelphia, a team that continues to just churn along at a really solid even keel. And if you can churn out a really solid even keel in MLS, particularly now, I think you have a chance to win, and that's kind of what you have to what you have to do when you're talking about Philadelphia. And we've talked about them a lot recently because they're near the top of the East, and it really is that system, that ability to plug and play. They bring in guys, they sell guys. They're able to just keep going, and you got to respect that. And I love watching Jim Curtin coach because he still, to me, looks like he is the aging bass player from like a 1990s alternative rock band
Sure.
at the casino, ready to play the concert with your dad. Yeah. Well, me, not my dad. My dad's 78. So,
so with us.
Yeah.
He works at Casino Rama, just outside of the GTA.
Yeah.
Nashville and Seattle. Nashville, big win. Ooh, Seattle, a couple of disappointing results in a row now for the champions of the continent. But Nashville, with this victory, Duane, puts themselves back into contention, back into the Western Conference conversation of top of the West. Yes, they're 9 points behind LAFC and 10 points behind Austin, but they're third right now. Nashville was able to parlay their not great beginning of the season with a good last few weeks, and slowly but surely made their way all the way to third in the Western Conference. And yesterday I gave you Hani Mukhtar as my favorite player to put in your fantasy, and guess what? He delivered last night. Beautiful goal. You can't say I didn't warn you all.
No, exactly. And speaking of fantasy, I just wanted to let go. I have a friend that I went to high school with that finished top 10 in North America in the MLS fantasy. That it's the people that do that, they are very self-driven about doing it well. I don't have the first clue how to do it, so don't ask me for advice on your fantasy, other than to actually change your lineups, because I don't do that, which is probably a problem. Anyway, look.
it's a good way. Well, it's a good way to start. Make sure your lineup is up to date and the players that you have playing are actually playing.
Yeah, that's really my problem. I just don't care enough. It's not real. I don't watch sports that way. That's a generational thing too, I think. We talk about the slight generational differences. I can't care about individual players and other teams. I just want to watch teams play and wins and losses. I don't care about that kind of stats. I love deep stats to look into how things are happening. What am I talking about here? Games. Actually, I want to talk about Austin quick. You mentioned them off the top. We continue to just play them off as being like, surely they're going to cool down. Surely they're going to cool down. At what point do we say maybe they're not going to cool down and try and figure out why they keep winning? We've seen teams like this in MLS before. The Vegas Golden Knights in another sport. There's your hockey reference. Sort of reminds me of that. Or Leicester, if we want to make this about soccer. Sometimes they just don't cool down. So we have to we should deep dive on Austin sometime soon, Kevin.
Yeah, and they were able to go through a controversy that wasn't one at the end of the day for now with Cecilio Dominguez, and they were able to go through a spell of having bad players not score. What's interesting to me is they're able to find ways for Felipe Martins, formerly of Montreal, to contribute. Max Urruti is scoring goals, and you have Sebastian Driussi still in the MVP conversation. So we're having a really good team in Austin, and if I was a betting man, which sometimes I am, take the odds right now for them to win MLS Cup, the odds are probably still very high, and you probably get a lot of value. And heck, right now they're top of the West, so you never know, Duane.
During the break, maybe I'll look up those odds and just see what they are, because I have my betting app open here because I didn't have a very good night in MLS last night. So it's late goals, man. Anyway, look, they're. I really do want to do a deep dive on them. I mentioned stats a minute ago. I kind of want to look at their underlying numbers because it is curious to me that they're able to do it. I thought that they were more solid last year than the results showed. Mm-hmm. They weren't able to score enough, so they're finding goals this year, and that's, again, I say this 1,000 times. That's the difference.
Yeah, they're one of the best teams, and they're one of the best teams in the league for expected goals, also. So those are worthy goals. I call their goals that they're creatively done, and you're right. We will next week. Take one day and deep dive, and I'll send you some suggestions of what we could talk about for Austin, but it'll be a great conversation on Austin. All right, we've talked about overall the scores, and you've seen them on your screen. By the way, you can do so on YouTube. Thank you for subscribing to our YouTube page, live on Twitter also. One of the few shows still doing live videos on Twitter, and that won't change for this show. And if you are a Francophone speaker, by the way, and you like hockey, brand new show that we'll do about hockey that is available on YouTube. But Duane, last night, Mark-Anthony Kaye made his debut after a very popular week where the Canadian was traded to Toronto FC for Raf Prizo, $1.025 million in GAM, a 2023 international spot, and of course a first-round draft pick next year by TFC. He made his debut for Toronto FC. There were some rumblings that he might not be available to start. Well, those rumblings turned out to be falsehoods. You shouldn't always listen to the coach, I guess. And here's MAK's debut. He was on the right of the middle of a 4-3-3 to start the game. This evolved during the game, but it's the beginning of the 4-3-3 phase of Bob Bradley that we alluded to it this year. That's his favorite rotation and formation with Mark-Anthony Kaye and good players in them that he used at LAFC. He's going to use the team just like he used LAFC, same blueprint. Swap Insigne for Vela or Bernadeschi, and you find yourself with a possible scenario here. Osorio Mark-Anthony Kaye played out of position. Mark-Anthony Kaye more used to playing on the left attacking side with LAFC and with Colorado, finding himself on the left middle side, finding himself on the right side here. Osorio played at the right, I guess, middle position for Toronto since the beginning of the season in a 4-4-2, and I find himself on the left of a 4-3-3 midfield. It's a lot of numbers, but just to mention that they were played off position, and I guess the result of the game showed that.
Well, they were real flat. I was saying to you off air, and I buy that. I said this on Twitter last night too. This team's getting hard to watch because they're not. It's not that they're not trying. Of course, the players in the pitch are trying. It's that everything they're doing is designed to try and set themselves up to sprint to the end. They're like, okay, I've been watching the Tour de France, Kevin. They're like they're sitting back in like the second peloton, like 20 minutes behind, hoping that they can just hit and like ride that thing all the way through in the last stretch. It doesn't often happen though.
The gruppetto. They're in the gruppetto trying to catch up. You know, they're in the ballet in the bottom, but you know it is. And they lost 2-0 last night. And no, this is not an 80s music reference, but Duane was enough to beat them last night as Duane scored twice.
Girls Wrong Film. I don't know what that meant. Some Duran song popped in my head. Yeah, Eye of the Tiger. Why didn't they go with Eye of the Tiger? That would have been more obvious.
Survivor. And that's Survivor who sang that.
Oh, was that?
Oh, yeah. Duran, different type. But, you know, enough to build a victory. Here's Toronto FC's record this year, 5-11-4. And it is what it is.
I laughed out loud at 0.3 XG. I hadn't seen that before. That sums the game up. I mean, it was terrible. It was just awful. And they're clearly trying. They rolled out the formation they're going to play when the big boys get there. And great. But right now, why did I waste my Wednesday night watching that mess is what I'm trying to say. And I'll be quite blunt with you folks. I only watched the first half. I put another game on for the second half.
Well, I think a lot of people probably did the same as you because there's only so many bandwidth you have for bad games. And there's been a couple of bad games by TFC. After the break, we'll talk about a more decent game by Vancouver as they came from behind to have a 2-2 draw on the road. A not so bad result for the Vancouver Whitecaps this season. A lot of formation change and a lot of player personnel change for Vancouver as they're playing a busy stint in MLS last weekend, midweek, and of course next weekend with 3 games in a day situation. We saw a lot of, I would call, rotation for Vancouver. But just before we take the break, I want to bring your attention to my production company, Spin Media Digital Solutions. If you're looking for new graphics overlays, you're looking for podcast consultancy, want to know how to bring your show and your content to the next level, you can do so by visiting our website, spinmediadigitalsolutions.com, or by contacting us at spinmediasolutions@gmail.com. We'll be right back after this short break.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And we're back on Soccer Today, taking the time to thank our patrons at patreon.com/2solitudes. A brand new episode just dropped earlier today. Duane and I talk about the controversy with Canada Soccer, with the president, with the process, with the Rick Westhead article earlier this week on TSN, the players' rebuttal, and more on patreon.com/2solitudes. Just like the great human beings you see on your screen, from Pierre to Blue Collar Dan to Patrick, who upped his contribution. Patrick, amazing to have you in this tier. Once again, Patrick White, friend of the show, longtime listener. Daniel Palmer, Sean Richardson, let's go boys, Blue Collar Dan, thank you for your support. And you can find the latest edition of the Two Solitudes podcast on our Patreon page at patreon.com/2solitudes. It's out, it's controversial, it's uncensored. It is available on our website. Duane, great show, and we're looking forward to re-listening to that show and maybe look at the evolution of that story in the next few weeks with the Canadian men's national team. A lot of details were made public earlier this week by Rick Westhead, and you can find all our reaction on our Patreon page. Vancouver was playing last night. Vancouver did not lose last night, but also did not win. But that's okay sometimes to draw on the road. A comeback draw at the death by Christian Duane. I want to say a little thought to Daibert Cachedo, who was put on the season-ending injury list. All the best for him going forward. Ryan Gauld scored at the 5th minute. The beginning of the match that was quite interesting. Alvaro Barreal scored early on at the 3rd minute for Cincinnati, and right away Ryan Gauld equalized at the 5th minute. Then we had a few minutes of boring soccer, and Brendan Vasquez decided to change the whole game at the 25th minute and give Cincinnati a 2-1 lead that almost made it all the way to the 3 whistles. But no, Christian Duane tied it up at the 82nd, and Vancouver was able to hold on to a 2-2 draw on the road. I want to draw your attention to the expected goals. That's a good performance for Vancouver. Rarely do we see this amount of expected goals. Usually they have half expected goal versus their goal scored, and maybe that's because they had Lucas Cavallini up top. It was a 3-4-2-1. Gauld and Pedro Vite, finally healthy this season, were able to find Cavallini and find ways to make things move, and Dahomey was able to get the job done late in the game.
Also, probably has something to do with Cincinnati being incredibly loose at the back when they're able to score. They're one of those all or nothing teams, although they're doing it to a playoff spot, which is good for them. By the way, Vancouver Whitecaps 51 in a decimal odds. 51 is their current odds to win the MLS Cup. So a $10 bet would win you $510 if the Whitecaps were to win.
For Austin, what is Austin? Do you have it in front of you?
Austin is, I'll give you a few here. Austin's at 9-1. Toronto is also at 51 to 1.
For Austin, it's still not bad because they could win. Like, I wouldn't be that surprised that Austin makes it all the way there. 9-1, it's still pretty good value.
Yeah, and Montreal 26-1. I'll give you the best value on this board according to Duane's betting tip. Best value. You want to get your betting kudos over there. The New England Revolution, last year's Shield winner, 41-1. That's not bad.
Sure. And you can find the link in the description below if you want a 125% deposit bonus at BETUS. No, Duane, let's continue to look at that Vancouver performance. I mentioned the lineup because I think it's fascinating how this is evolving. And of course, there's some players that are coming back from injuries, and it's going to change. But I like that he's not afraid, Vanni Sartini, to mix up his backline. We had Eric Godoy with Javon Brown and Tristan Blackman, a different backline. No Veselinovic. He's not able to substitute a few players. Raposo was back on the right. He's been put on the right and the left a few times. Same for Dahomey. Youngvert was back in the lineup. Pedro Vite was starting up top, well, to the right. And to me, that's a pragmatical decision. You know you have a busy stint in MLS. You're doing a bit better than you were at the beginning of the season. That's not the time to just play your same 11, because that's when they're going to get exhausted and you'll pay further down the road. This is maybe, at least in my opinion, the best managerial stint, the best few weeks of Vanni Sartini, because he's pragmatical, it's replicable, and we're seeing decisions that, at least in my mind and statistically speaking, make sense.
They're a team, you know who they remind me of? They remind me of the Canadian women's national team, in the sense that a lot of time our women don't really make sense in terms of their ability to find results, particularly when they play other top 10 opponents, and they do. I mean, they won the gold medal. I'm not saying Vancouver's going to win MLS Cup, because I truly don't believe they can with a really top-end talent, but they just overachieve and they believe in themselves, I think, at a level that I don't factor in when I'm trying to evaluate them. Now, that said, I'm not going to back down from our preseason stuff, because our preseason stuff was based on solid fact, and that solid fact is bearing itself out. Mr. White is not scoring at the same level they would, otherwise they'd be higher up the table. They're on a good run right now. That's, I think, because Cavallini has stepped into that place. That was more predictable than White continuing at a way above career pace before, but it wasn't predictable based on how he played. So this is not to justify our picks. Picks are picks. We get them wrong more than we get them right, because they're picks. Otherwise, we'd all be rich on gambling.
Exactly. And by the way, there's a very few percentage of people that get rich off gambling, by the way. A very small percentage. But it is interesting to me, and you're right, and we can look at the standings right now, because Vancouver is doing a whole lot better than they were. So I'll draw your attention to number 10. That's where Vancouver is in the playoffs right now. And number 10 is not bad. It's just outside the playoffs, and just 2 points outside the playoffs. They have 20 games played versus 19 for Seattle and the Galaxy, who are their rivals for a playoff spot. But the Galaxy is slowing down. Dallas is slowing down. They're not on the up and up. Vancouver and Portland are slowly becoming on the up and up, and Seattle is just staying there. We're having 3 Cascadia teams on the verge of being playoff contenders, and the Dallas and the Galaxy are both slipping at the wrong time. It could be a perfect storm for Vancouver with a couple of results, and it could be not only in the playoffs, but with maybe 1 or 2 points buffer with an outside of the playoff position.
Yeah, look, it's very tight, just like it is on the East, except for the West has those 2 teams that are kind of pacing themselves away more than we see on the other side. Looking at that, Vancouver's where they should be, and if they continue to be a battle there and they're playing meaningful games, in the final weeks of the season, I think the season can be viewed as a success for them, whether or not they get over that red line or not, because again, and this is belaboring the point, but again, this is where their talent puts them, so they're not over or underachieving at the current moment. But if they continue this pace, then hell, yeah, they deserve the credit they get. Seattle, we didn't talk about, we flipped over in the regular season, or in the regular part of the show. Everyone assumes they're the kings of tapering, right? Like everyone assumes they're just going to find another sprint. They're going to find a gear again. One year they're going to get caught. One year their ass is going to get bitten with this, and they might not do it. Is it going to be this year? The talent suggests that no. Yeah. But when you look, the only team that has talent that rivals LAFC right now, it's provable, is Seattle, really, but yet their performance is where it is in terms of the standings. So that's going to be something interesting to watch. We are definitely at the point now where the standings kind of are interesting, because they weren't for the first till July. That's July 1st rule. We're past July 1st. We got to look at it. Yeah,
Cincinnati and Charlotte are in the playoff position in the Eastern Conference. Those are things would not be predicted at the beginning of the season. Philly number 1, NYCFC 2 also. Let me just switch over to the other one. That's not the right one. So let me just go to the proper standings right here. Here we go. So Montreal is 4th with 29 points in 19 games. Philly is number 1. NYCFC number 2. New York number 3. It's a musical chair game with those 3 teams for the last few weeks. 1 week is NYCFC, 1 week is the Red Bulls, 1 week is Philly. NYCFC does have a game in hand versus Philly and New York. Montreal is fourth, but I want to draw you. Montreal does have one game in hand here, but 29 points. Then Cincinnati 27 and Charlotte 26. Columbus got 26 too. It's a very tight middle of the top. I guess you go with the upper second quarter of the standings is very congested. This feels like a proper rush hour in Montreal. Cars are bumper to bumper.
Philly, New York, Montreal, Orlando have consistently been in those top 5 spots for a while, and it's hard to imagine that they're going to slip up. We could all suggest that maybe one of those teams we might think of differently than others, but all of those have consistently been in those spots. So I would put them into a tier that are fighting for the playoff spots and for that one last home advantage versus not spot. Then you get into that next mix, and then it gets difficult because you don't know what TFC is going to look like in 4 weeks. I think they're too far out of it now, but you don't know. If they won 7 in a row or something, yeah, they're back in it. You don't know what Atlanta's going to look like if they start to get healthy. You don't know what the Revs are whether they're going to be able to move it again. They have the talent to do so. Columbus seems to be finding some scoring again from a Canadian kid that TFC didn't sign. We helped them along the way too. So anyway, but he came up and got a couple assists coming for Crew 2. So it's funny that Crew 2 is maybe producing more TFC Academy players than TFC Academy this year. But anyway.
That's a... Look at all TFC is the Manchester City of the league, or the Chelsea, I guess, where they get players young, they have it in their system. They're like, no, you're not good enough. They sell them, and then they buy them back at a loss later. Because like, oh wait, we made a mistake. You're actually good. Come back, play for us.
Yeah, well, except for I wish that Phil Foden came out of the TFC Academy because that would make things a lot more interesting. But anyway, we talk about Europe on Tuesdays, starting in about 3 more weeks. So there you go.
Absolutely. All right. So this was the standing lookout in MLS, and of course, before we say goodbye, later tonight it's the W Championship Semifinals. Canada will be playing Jamaica at 10 p.m. and the USA will be playing at 7 against Costa Rica. So it's Jamaica, USA, Costa Rica, and then Canada, Jamaica. And here are the scores of the W Championship in the group stage, so you can look at what path. And of course, Mexico is eliminated. Jamaica surprising performance in the group stage with 2 wins and 1 loss. They lost to USA, but they did beat Mexico and they did beat Haiti. It won't be that easy, but Canada is the favorite against Jamaica. The important thing tonight is if you qualify for the final, in the final, if you win, you qualify for the Olympics. If not, you'll get a second chance path to the Olympic Games. Yeah, and again, you'll play there'll be a home and home playoff with the team that wins the third. There'll be essentially a bronze medal game in the tournament. The winner of that game will advance to play the silver medalist, if you want to use Olympic terms, and they will play a home and home later on this year to determine that final Olympic spot. This is a high pressure game. They should beat Jamaica. I suspect they will beat Jamaica, but there's no room for error here. They'll get a second chance, so it's a little more forgiving than the actual Olympic tournament or the actual World Cup tournament in the past, where if you lost that semifinal game, you were just done. You do have a second chance now. That does benefit them a little bit more, but yeah, they got to get a good result. And more, I think they've got to get going offensively. The Costa Rica game was a little bit better because you would expect Costa Rica to push back, and they still managed to dominate that game and get a goal early and a goal late to salt that away. But it's been huff and puff up top for most of this tournament. That's been the Canadian national team all the way back to 2015 at least. And I mean, they won, a couple medals and including a gold in there. So who am I to talk about it? Exactly. Who knows? Maybe that's the way to play, actually. Who knows? But that will be, of course, be played tonight. We'll have all the results on tomorrow's show with the weekend preview in MLS also. And we'll look at the Canadian Premier League going forward. Also, if you would like to bring your content creation to the next level, go to spinmediadigitalsolutions.com and you can contact myself or my team, and we'll be able to support you in podcast consultancy, graphics overlays, and bringing your show and your content to the next level. If you would like to subscribe to this podcast, it is available everywhere you find your favorite podcasts, from Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, and more. And of course, available since the last few hours, the Two Solitudes Soccer Podcast. Duane and I talk about the controversial week for Canada soccer, all aspects, all angles. We're going to break it down, and we did break it down on the latest show that is available for patrons only at patreon.com/2solitudes. As always, until tomorrow, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramie. Have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.